When we talk about ethics in tech or innovation or AI, it's easy to say that companies should do this or that. But then there's this further question about how they should actually get that stuff done because we're talking about very large, very complex organizations. There's not a single person in control. And so the question becomes, how do we get this done on the ground? And more specifically, how can we get teams of data scientists to do the ethical work that needs to be done? That's the area of focus for today's guest, Marc Steen. Mark is a senior research scientist at TNO. It's a nonprofit research and technology organization in the Netherlands. He's also author of the book Ethics for People Who Work in Tech. Seems like an appropriate title. His primary claim is that for data scientists, ethics is a process that needs to be seen as a process. Or as he put it in a way that I really like, ethics should be seen as a recurring agenda item. And what I like about this conversation is that it's a conversation with a practitioner. It's not an academic. I talk to lots of academics. I'm a former academic. It's fun to talk to academics. I think what they have to say is informative and crucial, but it's also super important, I think, that we talk to actual practitioners and actual people who are on the ground working day in, day out with other data scientists. It's crucial, I think, to get that perspective if we're going to get a holistic understanding of what ethics actually looks like in tech. Okay, so that's what this episode is about: how to work with data scientists to incorporate ethics into their day to day processes. I'm your host of Ethical Machines, Reed Blackman. And as usual, I'm going to say please subscribe and share and follow and blah, blah, rate it 5 stars, etc., etc. Comments, questions, trenchant criticism, send them to em@reedblackman.com. And that's all I got. Let's go talk to Mark. So, Mark, when a lot of times when I think about ethics, I think about ethical inquiry. And if people ask me what is ethics, I think about a kind of systematic inquiry into, let's say, the nature of what's right and wrong and good and bad. At least that's what I think about when I put my philosopher's hat on and people ask me, what is ethics? When people ask you, what is ethics? Given the kind of work that you do, I take it your reply is something like, ethics is a process. So I want to hear a little bit more about that. What do you mean when you say ethics is a process, and what are you contrasting it with? What are the non-process things that people might mistake ethics for, or something along those lines?
Yeah, indeed. My reply would be very similar to yours. So the context in which people ask me this is I work a lot with technologists, with developers, data scientists, and then they will ask me, "Hey, can you help us integrate ethical aspects into our projects?" And then some people will think of ethics. That's what I'm contrasting it with, like a checklist, maybe to do, maybe
Sure.
the
Yeah.
GDPR, the privacy compliance, and then I would say I'd rather see it as a process with several iterations. So you try out things, you learn from that, you get better at it, and also a participatory process where you invite people from outside the organization as well to talk about these issues because you can learn a lot from others. So
Yeah.
an iterative process, a participatory process. That's for me ethics,
So
but
I
it's very similar to what you were saying. It's reflection, it's inquiry, and I'm adding to that deliberation as an ongoing discussion with also answers coming out of it, things that you can try out and learn from.
so I want to hear more about the process. I think you could also have a checklist to figure out whether or not people have actually engaged in such and such a process, right? So there's a compatibility between having checklists for, let's say, data scientists to use to make sure they're doing all the things, and one of the things that they're checking off is that they've engaged in a certain kind of process. I want to
Mhm.
hear more about the deliberation front. I had a conversation pretty recently with John Basil. He's a professor at Northeastern, and we were talking about the sort of perils of having people who aren't particularly trained in ethical inquiry, ethical deliberation, to engage in ethical deliberation. I said in that conversation that when I was a professor, when we had first year, second, third year, fourth, sometimes fourth year students engaging in ethical inquiry, especially in hot button issues, they weren't particularly good at it. They were okay as a group. And in a corporate setting, especially, you can have the loudmouth winning as opposed to the quiet person who's a bit wiser, smarter, etc. So I don't know. I want to hear more about what you think. What kind of deliberation or ethical deliberation do you think, say, data scientists and data engineers should be engaging in?
Yeah. First, a bit of content and then a bit of relational. Content wise, I have a series of handful of questions that I can put on a table that will take them through several ethical perspectives without me having the need to explicitly talk about philosophy or ethics. So these are
Hmm.
relatively accessible questions like, hey, imagine your project being successful. it's having an output, outcomes, and impact in the world? And what would be key pluses that you're aiming for, benefits that you're aiming for to bring about in the world? For whom are these pluses? In what sense are these pluses? Are these benefits?
Sure.
And on the other hand, their cost, their risk, their negative impact, possibly. And then for which people are those? I'm also introducing often maybe a benefit for that type of people, but maybe a cost for other people. And also for the environment, that's something that, of course, with the consumption of materials into the hardware and consumption of energy into running software, that's also an impact. And I have several different ethical perspectives. Another one is put on the table something like, hey, are there obligations you need to fulfill, like
Yeah.
compliance to legislation? There are rights of people, fundamental rights. A third one is
Yeah.
relational ethics. If you imagine this system working, then how will it impact people, how they behave towards each other, how they interact? Will one person see the other one increasingly as a number, only as a number? And the fourth one is, and that's maybe where I will use a little bit of vocabulary from philosophy, is virtue ethics, where we
Hmm.
dive into how a certain technology or application can either help or sometimes also hinder people to develop courage or wisdom or self-control, classical virtues. So normally I will not use philosophy a lot. Sometimes people will ask questions and then I'll answer it a bit. But yeah, my experience, you can do lots of things that people recognize and can relate to with pluses and minuses, with duties and rights.
I'm not worried about when facilitators are present. When a good facilitator is present, I'm not worried about the loudmouth winning the day. I think that in most cases, ethics boards, ethical risk committees, whatever you want to call them within large organizations, they don't have a default facilitator. So yeah, if it's a workshop setting and you're
Hmm.
there or I'm there or someone with a relevant expertise is there to guide that conversation appropriately, that's not an issue. The problem from my perspective is that there's not that facilitator usually. There's just a cross-functional cross-departmental membership from the organization. No one is the anointed facilitator,
Hmm.
and even if there were, that person is not necessarily a very good facilitator. And so that's one thing that worries me about let's put ethical deliberation into the hands of data scientists, those frontline data scientists and engineers, and let them engage in that ethical deliberation. I, I think they need a tremendous amount of training, maybe a facilitator. And the problem, though, is that if you have a facilitator, you need a facilitator. That makes it very hard to scale potentially.
Yeah, maybe it's good to explain that the context of my work, it's always projects, and every project will have a project manager, a project coordinator, or a principal investigator, different names, but same type of role. And they will ask me to come into their meeting, a normal project team meeting, a dedicated workshop. And they will
Yeah,
also have a role in putting ethics on the agenda because they ask me, they invite me. And
sure.
ideally, they will keep ethics as a recurring agenda point in their
Yeah,
normal project team
yeah,
meeting,
yeah,
even in Agile, even in Scrum. Maybe not always all of the perspectives of all of the ethics, but ideally they learn something from the first workshop that I help to facilitate. Second workshop, I don't have to be there because it's a
yeah,
normal, regular work meeting. And then they'll
yeah,
remember something, hopefully. Anyways, that addresses the scaling thing. I try to give it out of my hands into the hands of the project manager. Yeah, whenever possible, that they
yeah,
can keep an eye on that. Because
yeah.
yeah, I cannot scale myself and do 1,000 versions of myself.
Sure, yeah. I wanna hit 2 points that we talked about so far. One, I wanna get more into the process that you're talking about. But before we do, I wanna talk about the virtue ethics angle. So, hey, the name of my company is Virtue, big fan of Aristotle. I don't think he's right. I've always enjoyed reading and teaching Aristotle, writing on Aristotle. But I always thought you're not going to teach individual people to be virtuous, let alone teach corporations to be virtuous. Virtue has to do with doing the right thing for the right reason, the right kind of way, having a habit of doing things in that way.
Mhm.
To your point, to manifesting character traits like courage and generosity, et cetera, et cetera. And that strikes me as standardly too high of a bar. It's when you talk about virtue ethics in this context, I don't think you're talking about trying to create virtuous employees or something along those lines or virtuous data scientists who are working on this project. Or so are you talking about that? And if not, then what do you mean when you talk about virtue ethics in this context?
Yeah, yeah. Virtue ethics is one of those ethical perspectives that often in practice, they have two sides. One side is you're looking at the uh, a daily life situation or a workplace situation or a situation in society where the system you are working on will have been implemented, will have been deployed, is being deployed, and then how does it help people or hinder people to cultivate certain virtues? Social media app, and that's an example that Shannon Veller writes about in her book. A social media app very easily grows anybody's skills, habits, dispositions of self-control because that's the way it is designed. All the dark patterns, all the scrolling that you're lured into. Other side of it, and that's more to your point, I'm also willing to invite people to look into themselves. What virtues do you need? The technologist, the data scientist, the software engineer working on such a project. And sometimes that connection is easy. If you want your algorithm, your AI system to be fair, probably, very likely, you will then need to cultivate within yourself something like fairness or justice or a sense of justice and fairness. And now, whether that's a high bar or not, luckily, the organization in which I work and lots of our partners and clients are within government, semi-government, for the good. So they already set themselves a high bar relatively.
Mhm.
And then they invite me. So they want to do something with ethics. Yeah, I think it's realistic that I ask them, that I invite them to look into themselves. That's at the end of a meeting. What do you think in the next meeting you will need to do? Some people will need courage, raise their hand when they see something that's maybe going to be a problem in the future. They will need self-control, that putting a restraint on themselves, not
Mhm.
adding any more features because often there's the risk of feature creep, too many features.
Sure.
So
So
yeah, the bar is high, and yeah, Mark, often that works for me, given the context in which I work.
right, okay, so one point is something like one of the things that we're aiming to do is we're aiming to create virtuous citizens or a society that encourages virtuous behavior, discourages vicious behavior. And so one sort of question that you have people ask themselves is to what extent will this project, this product create a society in which being virtuous is enabled versus disabled or encouraged versus
Hmm.
discouraged or something along those lines. Okay, I get that. That makes sense. That's an interesting perspective. I might put that sort of, I don't know, broadly in the utilitarian bucket of we want to create more good people than bad people or something like that. But okay, but put that to the side. I don't really care about how you slice it up. The other thing that is interesting is this point about you can ask them to be or to think about their own virtues or the virtues that they need to manifest. And the reason that you're able to do that is because you're working with people who are, at least in principle and organizationally anyway, dedicated to welfare of citizens or something along those lines, right?
Exactly,
Because if you work
exactly.
with
The greater
government and
good.
police,
Yep, yep.
yeah, to reference this conversation I had again with John Basil, he was talking about creating an ecosystem, an ethics ecosystem where data scientists and engineers take ethics seriously as a matter of course. Like it's just part of what it is to be a data scientist engineers
Hmm.
to take ethics seriously. And I aired a good degree of skepticism because the examples that we referenced in that conversation were one, the military, and two, healthcare. And in the military, they have the stated goal of something like protecting citizens. That's the sort of mission, that's the purpose of the organization. And then in healthcare, it's to promote the welfare, the health of the patient. And so you have built into, the mission of what it is to be in healthcare and what it is to be in the military, at least in principle.
Hmm.
It's already ethically mission oriented. But just data scientist engineer as such, I don't think has that kind of aim, right? You can be in financial services, you can be in yeah, you can be in healthcare, but you can be in mining industry, you can be in gas and oil, you can be in, I don't know, aeronautics, whatever, you can be in any industry, retail. And so there's not enough there. But I take your point that because you have the audience that you do, you're able to introduce this. Hey, listen, we're in the business of thinking about the welfare of the country
Hmm.
or the welfare of our communities, the welfare of citizens and their capacity as citizens. And because we already have that organizational commitment, what are the kinds of virtues that we need to manifest in order to successfully carry out that mission? So that's, yeah, your point is well taken about the context in which you're delivering
Yeah, yeah,
these
and I can say
workshops
a
or these
bit more
meetings.
because I live and work in the Netherlands, and it has a tradition, also many other countries in the EU, of fundamental rights, respecting those, fairness,
Yeah.
democracy. I'm not saying that the US and China don't, but they have sometimes a different cultural angle on the balances
I think it's,
between
yeah. I think it's fair to say that Europeans are looking out for citizens in a way that the US is not. I don't think anyone would balk at that claim.
Okay,
They
then
might think they go
I
wrong
can
in those intentions, but they have the intentions.
yeah, no. So also with the GDPR and the new EU AI Act, it is often a vocabulary like the EU tries to be something different from the
Mhm.
US, where companies can often do things that they can't in the EU, and compared to China, where the state can do things that they can't do in the EU. And that's a large context. I can make it more practical. The Netherlands has funded last couple of years, I think already 15 or so, ELSA labs, ethical, legal, societal aspects of AI. I'm working two of them. So that's an explicit commitment to enabling technologies to collaborate with ethical, legal, and societal experts, integrating those into their project. Recently, two new what do you call it? Vocational education, University of Applied Sciences, I think you would call it in the US. I was part of the visitation committee of one of those,
Yeah.
so I know a little bit about it. Why I'm saying this, coming back to what you were saying, they teach data science and AI, but very explicitly responsible in front of it. Responsible data science, responsible AI. So yeah, there's a whole atmosphere of, yeah,
Sure.
maybe it is already normal, yeah, to
You're
consider
saying it
ethics as part of the package of what you do as a professional.
so you're saying that as part of the educational regimen, the educational curriculum for a data scientist, they're going to encounter
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
modules or a course or classes on data ethics,
yeah.
as an example.
Yeah, and these are two
Yeah.
new ones. One launched last year, one launched the year
Mm.
before it. And broadly also the four technical universities in the Netherlands, Delft, Eindhoven, Twente, Wageningen. They had for years. In the
Yeah, Delphi
second
now,
year,
yeah.
everybody get the book on ethics by Van der Poel and Rooijakker. Maybe not world famous, but world famous within the Netherlands anyways. So yeah, I think we set the bar on a certain level for us.
Can you say a little bit about how your organization in particular came to embrace ethics? You were put into a position where you could help guide these ethics conversations, where data science and engineering teams seek your counsel so that you can help them integrate ethics into the process. And I different organizations have different ways of coming to take this kind of thing seriously. Were you already there and you were pushing for it internally? Was it they were looking for someone to do this and you sort of stepped forward? Why did they take it seriously to begin with? Was it, as you said earlier, because it was part of the ecosystem or it's become part of the ecosystem to
Mm.
take it seriously? Sort of, is it because it's government, lots of government work and military work and police work? Is that why? What's the explanation for why they've gone to the point at which they have someone like you facilitating conversations around what kinds of virtues do we need to manifest in order to achieve our AI, our
Yeah,
mission
yeah.
using AI?
Yeah, I think you've already pointed to lots of reasons. One thing that is worth mentioning as well is that the organization or work, TNO, the Netherlands Organization for Applied Scientific Research, it was founded, what is it, 70, 80 years ago, explicitly by the government to make a better bridge between academia and industry. Like that the
Oh,
industry
that's
can do
interesting.
useful things with the knowledge produced in academia. And also for the greater good, indeed, for welfare, being. And then was it easy to start working on ethics? No, it wasn't. I started doing this 15, 10 years ago. No, more. I need to adjust my timetable because time moves on as well.
I
Yeah, a relatively long time ago. Anyways, at that time, it was harder for the organization to embrace this fully because they were thinking ethics, that's something that philosophers do, maybe in some university department, but not. We're doing technology. We're all engineers, data scientists. And then increasingly it became more easy. And now, of course, with all the hype as well, it's much more easy to see in newspapers, magazines, journals, questions
yeah,
raised about ethical societal topics. So nowadays, it's more like my manager says to me, can you please help us find more people because there's going to be more work?
yeah, yeah. No, that's so interesting. I agree. It is the environment of people raising red flags, of headlines in the newspapers. I like to say that I never anyone that I work with, I never give a hard sell because I'm not going to be able to do it. I can't convince someone that this stuff is important just in a conversation. But yeah, it has to be that people awareness of the risks, of the awareness of the issues, of the need for integrating ethics, it bubbles up from the environment. Even though that we have something of that environment here, it's interesting that over there in the Netherlands, it actually has been integrated in a way that I think I have not seen it yet in government. We're starting to get it over in the US, We have the executive order, Biden's executive order, requirements around having chief AI officers for our government agencies. And those people, as part of their purview, part of their responsibilities, need to dive into AI ethics. But I think we're still very early on. But I see your point that your organization was founded by the government with a sort of ethical commitment being worn on its sleeve.
Yeah, societal commitment for sure. And then ethics was a bit new
I see.
word, new vocabulary for them, but they got
Yeah.
used to it. Yeah, one thing
Yeah.
that's also maybe worth mentioning, responsible innovation is like the umbrella term under which I often work. And
Yeah.
responsible innovation used to be called technology assessment, where it was like, hey, let's explore ethical societal impacts of new emerging technologies like nuclear, GMO, nanotechnology. Those were topics that they were concerned with. What I want to mention is that in other countries, it was often people in universities doing that work. But in the Netherlands, it was often technologists or engineers coming out of well, practical jobs in chemical industry, in water management, and then starting their work in addressing technology assessment and later on responsible innovation. So yeah, we like in the Netherlands to combine theory and practice and theory. So maybe that is conducive to yeah, an openness to embrace ethical and societal aspects.
Let's get back to the process stuff. I want to hear more about the process because I know we've talked about you facilitate conversations and you've got these lenses and questions that you ask people. So, if you think about ethics as a process that gets folded into the processes, procedures, workflows of data scientists and engineers as they're building whatever project that they're working on, what does it look like from your perspective to create or to make ethics a process or a set of processes? What does it actually look like on the ground? Because it's not just a bunch of data scientists, let alone philosophers, just thinking about the good life or what constitutes justice or something like
No,
that. So,
no, yeah.
what does that process actually look like?
Think of the process as having three steps. The three steps can be in 1 hour, the three steps can be in a full day. But, anyways, the three steps first one would be to identify issues that are at stake or that could become problems. Maybe it's privacy, maybe it's transparency,
Sure.
maybe it's fairness. Second step is to organize conversations about these within the project team for sure, but hopefully also inviting people from outside the client, the end user, prospective end user, others, people who will be impacted by the system once deployed. And again, the second step can be short, can be 20 minutes, can be a full day. And again, the suggestion, the proposal to repeat that to make it into an iterative process. Third
Yeah.
step will always be, and I need to stress that, and also it make people happy to hear that. Third step is to move towards action because practical oriented people like also action and making decisions and making things work. So out of every workshop or meeting needs to be something actionable. Find out something, build something, try out something. And that's of course also materials for a next meeting where they can talk about what did you find? Did it work? And that is also then becomes an engine of this iteration. So the third step is critical. Identify issues, talk about these and do stuff. Try out,
Yeah, that's
experiment.
and make it iterative. I think the iterative point is a good one. A lot of people, I think, they think, okay, we're going to develop this AI. We're thinking about it. Let's think about the ethical issues, and it's at the concept stage. But to your point, it's got to get done at every stage of the AI lifecycle, right? It's when you're thinking about what you're going to build, and then it's at the build stage, and then when you're testing and validating, and then when you're deploying and monitoring. That sort of conversation has to keep happening. I take it.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And one thing that I think people don't understand a lot is the people who start building it, who have the idea, are not going to be in most cases the people who are also monitoring the AI once it's out in the wild, right? It's usually different people, different teams. And so it's not like this people think, "Oh, the company has to take into consideration these ethical issues and risks and mitigate them." But the truth is that the company, of course, is comprised of many individuals, many teams. Different people have different responsibilities in the AI lifecycle. And so, can you say a little bit about there's people at the concept phase versus people at the monitoring stage versus people at the testing stage? How you facilitate? Do you have to facilitate conversations across those different teams? Do you create a kind of feedback loop from the teams who are involved in earlier stages? How does all that How does it all get orchestrated is one way to put it.
Yeah, the way that you're asking the question make me think of maybe this is a limitation of my work. So I will be asked to help only at a certain stage of the development process, in
I see.
ideation, concept
Yeah.
development, prototyping. But there will always be a point, that's just the nature of our work, of our organization, how we work for clients, partners, a handover. So then it goes to their organization. And there will be the full implementation, the deployment, hopefully an evaluation after a couple of
Yeah.
months to see whether the machine learning does what it's supposed to do, it doesn't derail into crazy directions. And here's actually a question that somebody asked me many years ago and still has not a good answer to it. Can you help us as a development team do something so that after the handoff to the client, the guarantees that we hoped had built into it, being transparent, being fair, privacy, something, so that they don't go away
Yeah.
after the handover. Yeah, we don't have a good solution
Yeah.
for it. The thing that we can
Yeah.
do culturally, relationally, is to choose partners, to choose clients, or have the partners and clients choose us,
Yeah.
so that on their side will be a project manager or an operational manager conducive to, yeah, of course, I know ethics and I want to continue the type of work
Yeah.
that you've been doing, but then how their organization organizes it, which can be different.
What I think you're highlighting, there's two, broadly speaking, two kinds of handoffs that go on. There's the intra-organizational handoffs, right? From the concept team to the design and build team to the validate, test, validate team to the deploy team to the monitor team. So one, there's just how do we make sure that there's conversations among those? Yeah, you could do stuff at the, let's say it's being designed and deployed in-house, right? You are going to have the team who's deploying it and monitoring it in the same organization, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're talking to each other. And so you ended the sort of three-step process with now do something, right? So in the concept phase, you might do something, but then things can get screwy down the line. So for instance, some teams will start testing their model and they'll find out it's not doing so great. And then they'll introduce new data into the model to make it do better, but they don't do another fairness check as an example, or they don't do another ethical risk check because now they're testing and they're trying to improve as opposed to the concept phase. So that's one reason why the ethics stuff has to be iterative at each stage of the AI
Mhm.
lifecycle because the model changes, the data changes, the intended context of deployment might change. Oh, we were going to use it for X, we weren't going to use it for Y, but now
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
also going to use it for
yeah,
Y.
yeah.
So that's
That's something, especially when it is government or administration related. That's really a risk. I mentioned the feature creep, and I was
yeah, yeah.
alluding to that where there's
I'd
a
call it
word for it.
context creep in this case. Yeah, context
Yeah,
creep. I would
yeah.
call it. Maybe we mean the same thing.
The doelbinding in Dutch. How would that translate into English?
Don't
Uh,
know.
No, but legally, if you want to do something with data collection about citizens and algorithms or AI and that do stuff with it administratively, you need a legal basis. And
Yeah,
maybe the legal basis was okay for use case one, but then after a bit of context creep or feature creep, it becomes
yeah.
use case B, and there's no proper legal basis for it unless you find another. Anyways, there's a
Right,
real
right.
risk. And that has actually happened to one system in 2020. That was a fraud detection algorithm, let's call it
Hmm.
that for short. And then the judge in The Hague in the Netherlands, it ruled that the government can no longer use it because,
Hmm.
well, there was something gone wrong with the legal basis for it. So that was an
Hmm.
interesting case.
So you have to have these sort of continuous ethics assessments, even if it's the same team across if it's the same team across the entire AI life cycle, which almost never happens as far as I know, that team would have to keep doing an ethics assessment because they're going to do stuff. They're going to tweak things along the way. And every tweak, some tweaks call for either going to tweak the model itself, and then you might need to do another risk assessment because you've introduced
Yeah,
new data or you've subtracted data. But then you also need to facilitate the kinds of conversations across teams. Hey, at the concept phase, we identified these risks. Here's what we think needs to be done about it. And then there's got to be checks to see whether anyone actually did this stuff. Because if now they hand it off to the other team, team one hands off to team two, and team two doesn't do the things that team one said to do, now
yeah.
you've made no progress. So that's not great.
Related to this, yeah, what happens down the line eventually with a system? You were talking about whether after handoffs, handovers, people keep a good eye on how it performs ethically and legally. So there's also a dynamic that I've seen in innovation management. If people have decided to procure this system, specification, implementation, deployment it's often also very hard for them to reconsider that because of all the sunken costs, all the investments, and maybe even careers of people, reputations of
Yeah.
people. So that's like a lock-in effect that can easily happen. What also can happen, and that's also notorious, I think, with the deployment of algorithms, again, fraud detection, for example. If people believe the system is good, they start using it. And then hopefully it will help increase efficiency and effectiveness. And that if you don't keep a good eye on, does it really work effectively, efficiently? How many false negatives? How many positives?
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
we have proper feedback loops installed? Do we learn? Do we adjust the model? All of that. If you don't, you have serious risk of eventually having a system that works fine, but produces lots of errors. And that's, yeah, that
Yeah.
has been the case in famously for many years already in the Netherlands. It was the childcare benefits scandal where many families received letters of the
Mm.
government saying you need to give us back the money, and that was incorrect. So many families were ruined financially, emotionally, relationally. And yeah, that has given us also climate, coming back to what we were talked about earlier, of yeah, we want to do good. We know data
Yeah.
science can do lots of stuff, but it can also do lots of stuff, yeah, in a bad way. So yeah, we try to be careful with it because we know it can go wrong so badly.
Yeah. Yeah. One thing, another side to the coin, which is you mentioned how do you get the client, the, like the party that you're building for? If you're building the AI, you're going to hand it off to a completely different organization. Forget about another team internally. How do you ensure that they're going to use it responsibly? And that is tough. There's not I don't think there's a solution for that incidentally, other than that organization saying, "Hey, we want to make sure that we use this responsibly. What are your recommendations here?" Or how do we co-create or collaboratively create a policy around the responsible use of this particular solution? Or how do we create a RACI matrix? Or how do we create metrics, ethical metrics to make sure that we monitor this thing appropriately? And if without that commitment on the other side, you're not going to know. And then the other side of the coin is if you're a purchaser, if you're acquiring from an organization the AI that they've developed, how are you going to make sure that they've developed things on the ethical up and up? Are you
Uh,
just going to go legal minimum? We just want attestation. We just want that developer to say everything's cool here, ethically speaking. Or do you require some kind of proof? What is that proof? If you require some kind of proof, what does that proof look like? Is it like a third party audit? Is it an internal audit or an internal assessment? And if they fall short of that, what are you going to do? Are you going to tell them forget the whole thing? Are you going to give them a grace period? Okay, get your act together in 3 months, 6 months, whatever. Are you going to actually help your vendor develop an ethics program or ethics solution around that particular AI? How are you going to train people to use the AI that was developed by someone else to make sure that the AI plus human results in ethical outcomes, not just the AI by itself, because often it's not operating by itself; it's often operating with the human in the loop. This is one way in which I think the transparency conversation gets more color. It's not just about transparency with like the general public or with government about, hey, here's what we're doing, but it's transparency across
uh
teams and across organizations about, hey, here's what we've done, here's why we've done it, here's what we think we needs to be done from an ethics perspective, so on and so forth.
Yeah, first of all, Reed, I agree with your first comment. Like, it's difficult after a
Yeah,
handoff
for sure.
from the supplier to the user, from the developer to the user. How can you guarantee?
Okay, so Mark, we've talked a lot in the abstract about AI projects, but we mentioned military, police, government applications. Can you give me some examples of, I don't know, some AI solutions in the military or police or government space where ethics was folded in a fruitful way?
Yeah, can give two examples, one military, one police. For the military, we worked on human machine teaming and meaningful human control. Those are terms that are often used in the military in
Yeah,
relation to unarmed drones. And I'm often stressing unarmed because, well, the drone only takes pictures for reconnaissance. And then eventually it will, of course, be used. It can, of course, also be used in targeting and the use of violence, of use of force. And then we looked into how you can organize it in such a way that is meaningful human control. So the person is looking at the tablet in the field, having the drone images on the tablet, and then being able to use AI to recognize something, but also being able to push back on what the algorithm thinks it sees, because the person on the ground will have additional knowledge and they have their own experience and they have the discretion. So how to organize that properly? You can say it's meaningful human control. You can also say it's human machine teaming. those terms are close to each other. So that was one project that has to do
Yes, that's a real
because without such a human in the loop, without such meaningful human control, it could derail into the killer robot scenario that has been depicted in sci-fi movies, like it taking decisions and taking people's lives. That's of course something that not of course, but that's something that the Dutch military doesn't want.
yeah. Yeah, so the example is one in which it's human in the loop as playing a necessary part or an important part in ensuring the decrease of, say, false positives and false negatives for that matter, in a high stake situation where identification of the thing as an X, let's say as an
Yep,
appropriate military target is pretty high
yep,
risk.
yep, yep. Indeed, yeah. When you say the word high risk, it reminds me of the EU AI Act that has high risk, and
Yeah.
then of course, well, that's pyramid of
And how about the police case?
the police case that we worked on, we are still working on it. The use of cameras, and then I'm talking about diverse types of cameras, shop owners, shopping centers, individuals. They have the Ring doorbell. The police have the cameras. They have drones when there are events. They have the body cams, and then a data scientist can easily voice something like, well, we can connect all of the data to all of each other, and then we'll have a complete picture. But then, there's privacy, there's the legal
Yeah.
basis that we were talking about earlier. You cannot just use any image from any source for any purpose. There must be a
Yeah.
legal basis for using, having permission to use that data for that purpose, only for that purpose. That's a whole, yeah, plate of spaghetti, you might say, like all of the cameras, all of the images.
Yeah.
Ideally, it would be from a platonic perspective, almost like it would be great if we combine everything with everything. But no, that would not be a good idea practically, ethically, legally, and societally. So then we help them with for that purpose in that situation. For that case, you can combine, but for the other cases, you can't. And here's how you can ask
Yeah, I
permission.
see.
Here's how you can and cannot share and store and analyze. So that's an interesting project. But it starts really easily. There's cameras everywhere. Where that's great because then you can have a situational awareness more
Sure.
easy. Yeah, but wait a minute. Then come all the
Yeah, drawing
question.
guardrails around not simply what data is collected, but the ways in which it can be combined, the kinds of inferences that you're justified in making or can make from a privacy perspective. Yeah, super interesting. So just wrapping up, you've clearly done a bunch to fold ethics into the data science engineering process. I'm wondering what you think is the best path forward from a data science engineering perspective. So, what do you want to see happen among data scientists, engineers to keep evolving AI ethics in practice?
Yeah, maybe we touched upon this earlier. I would love to see in a couple of years' time, but maybe hopefully earlier, that for data scientists, software developers, but also the project managers and what you were talking about, the people higher up, that they have not only a good understanding of what technology can and also what it cannot do, and also a vocabulary and tools and frameworks so that they can actually practically, effectively integrate ethics into their work. So if they are more familiar with, hey, can we talk about risks? And then have a bit more vocabulary like for what fundamental or human right would it
Mm,
be a risk? Or if they talk
I see. Yeah.
about the benefits that they will say, yeah, on the one hand, the benefit for that group, but it will be a cost for the other group. Like the self-driving car is good for the people owning it, but it's maybe not a good idea for the people on bikes or the pedestrians,
Yeah.
unless, etc., you do something else. So it can be also a start of a creative process. Often creativity, I think in my experience, start with the requirements and limitations. But yeah, if they have a vocabulary tool, the workshop format that we talked about, if that is normal part of their work. So their
Yeah.
normal project meeting will have, hey, progress, status, legal, ethical, how's the client doing, and how are the field trials doing, how are the end users experiencing this, how are the people, how are they doing? So an overall picture, if that's recurring part of their practice.
Yeah. It's one. I think that one you're saying it's a regular practice, but also it's a kind of broadened perspective on their part, right? That you want it to be normalized or
Right.
habitual. Hey, we can go back to virtue ethics after all. Habitual to think about the ethical dimensions of what they're building as well. Yeah, super interesting. Cool, Mark. Thank you so much. It's been really interesting to see how you've really folded the ethics into the process of AI development, see what it is like on the ground as opposed to this high level policy stuff that who knows if they actually trickle down to data scientists, engineers. But yeah, thanks so much. It was really interesting.
Thanks a lot for the invitation. I enjoyed very much talking to you.
Me too. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening. And now let me thank the people who have made this podcast possible. So, first of all, we have Delano Alexander. He's been with me since day one. He showed me even how to start recording a podcast in the first place. He does editing stuff. He's been fantastic, and he does really everything I ask him to and more. I've never met anyone else who just says so much. Yeah, I don't know how to do that, but I'll figure it out. What more could you ask for in a producer? Next up, Jennifer Strong, my podcast guru. I don't know what else to call her. She just has advised me on how to design a podcast, how to grow it, and she's responsible for, if you like, this kind of season 2 relaunch and everything around it. So thank you to you, Jennifer. Next up, Meg Marco, responsible for all the excellent artwork. Before I did the artwork, I didn't really know what I was doing. We put it together. It worked well enough, but I think Meg really did a phenomenal job bringing everything together. Garrett Lang, sound engineer that I frankly don't deserve. He's just too good for this podcast. Don't tell him I said that, though. Next up, Benjamin Koltgen. He is a professor of philosophy who has helped me source guests, identify who's interesting, who has things to say, etc., etc. So without him, I wouldn't have anyone to talk to. And then finally, Ashley Wasylenko, who helps with all manner of administrative things, making sure that the podcast guests find their way to the podcast, can schedule the recording, get their bios and headshots, and really just keeping the show on the rails and me organized. Thanks to all of you. Really appreciate all your hard work.